AI in Action is brought to you by Alldus International, covering your business's staffing, consulting, and networking needs. Our host brings you the leading minds in AI, sharing their story, their success, and their advice. Focusing on fast-tracking you to the top, AI in Action cuts through the hype to help you kickstart your data science career. To listen to the latest AI in Action podcast, head over to www.alldus.com/podcast or subscribe via iTunes, Stitcher, or Google Podcasts.
You're listening to AI in Action. I'm your host, JP Valentine. Our guest today is Melissa Curtis. Melissa is the Senior Director of Clinical Computational Sciences at EQRx. Melissa, welcome to the show.
Hi, JP. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's our pleasure. Melissa, let's start with your background. You've had quite an interesting journey thus far. So could you talk us through where you first got started in technology, some of the roles you've held along the way, and take us up to just before you joined EQRx?
So my first role was working as a health economist at a health economics consulting firm. We were doing research primarily on behalf of pharmaceutical companies, trying to demonstrate the value of their products. And so one of the great things was that we were data agnostic, and so got a chance to use all sorts of different data sources that people were using at that time. Insurance claims data, chart review data, learned a lot about data analysis. But some of the other things that really stuck with me, one was that I saw all of these really important research questions. And I saw that the data that we were using really couldn't support them. I was writing papers with limitation sections that were longer than the method sections and realizing we just have to do better. Everyone around me was just kind of accepting that that was the way that things were. And at that point, I was introduced to some of the early folks at Flatiron. And, I know many people know Flatiron Health for what it is today, which is a large organization, 1,000 people, recently acquired by Roche. But in 2014, Flatiron was about 30 people. So very different kind of decision-making criteria that led me to that company. But what I saw in it at that time was, for the first time, people were really calling it a problem, the research that we were using in the research data that were available to use in oncology. And I loved that they were calling it a problem and bringing together the right people to solve it. And over the next 6 years, we really did just that. When I look at how Flatiron data is being used today, it's really astounding what's possible. And the research that's been produced and is really something that I'm proud of.
Yeah, to be able to join at such an early stage and look back now to see what Flatiron has become, it must be incredible. And you played a pivotal role with some very senior leadership roles and building out the team. It'd be good to understand some of the challenges that you faced while doing that and what you learned from it.
So the data that exists in the real world is messy and is not kind of at the start what you would want to use for research. And so we had to invest a ton of time into kind of how do we pull out the relevant points from the electronic health record that then will make this usable for research. And so we developed a technology-enabled abstraction approach over time, complemented with some machine learning approaches as well. But a lot of what we found was just some of the variation in clinical practice that then is reflected in the data. Doctors do things differently, they have different workflows, and it really requires on the data side to look at it as a story and try to piece back together what may have happened. And that was something that I really enjoyed. So one of the pieces of the puzzle that I focused on was mortality data, something as simple as understanding when people die, which is really important for oncology research. It's kind of the one outcome that is relevant for every cancer type and really something that just is very important. And you think about when a doctor knows that somebody has died, and you think that they, of course, know when their patients have died. But in fact, we found that about 60% of the time they did, and the other 40%, maybe a patient was transferred to hospice when they realized that they were towards the end of their life, or they traveled back home to be with family, or all of these kind of real world scenarios that happen that led to, oftentimes we didn't have a great way to capture
That's amazing. It's an amazing statistic.
And so what I did was work with a team to develop an approach that brought in a number of external data sources, from national data sources and commercial data sources, and develop an algorithm to improve the mortality capture in our record. And now it's about at 90% sensitivity. So that was something that I was really proud of.
Yeah, that's quite the jump. So you spent 6 years at Flatiron, an amazing journey, and then in May of this year, you decided to make the switch. So talk us through that journey, and then tell us all about EQRx.
Sure. So one of the things that struck me about when I was at Flatiron is, they always did such a great job of making sure employees felt close to the problems. And so I had opportunities to shadow oncologists and hear from cancer patients. And as a researcher, it's easy to look at the high level and all the amazing scientific advances that have happened in cancer treatment over the last 10 or so years. But that's really only part of the story. Every single time that we had the opportunity to hear from patients, the story on the ground was quite different. Every single one of those patients would talk about the cost and the lack of transparency and just the burden when you're going through this really, really tough time, to add also trying to navigate this system with high costs that are incredibly complex. And this year I heard about EQRx. And the goal of EQRx is to make innovative drugs that are equally as good or better than established therapies and make them available at radically lower prices. And so this was something that was so appealing to me, this idea, it's not rocket science, but really no one has dared to do it. And here in EQRx, you have this team of industry insiders. These are people that have been in biotech, that have really been on the inside of this industry saying, enough is enough. We know how to develop drugs. Let's do this better. And so that was something that was really appealing to me.
Yeah, and to everyone else who's listening, it's quite a mission to get behind, because it's such an obvious problem that, as you said, no one has dared to tackle yet. So to be able to take all of the amazing people who've joined EQRx thus far and work on that together, it's got to be exciting. So give us some insight into what you're actually looking for at EQRx.
Yeah, sure. So well, across the board, we are looking for a whole lot of things. Our company is growing quite quickly. We were at about 30 people when I joined in May of this year. We're at about 80 now in October, and a lot of plans for growth in the upcoming months and years. What the team that I'm building is the clinical computational sciences team. And so what that really means is, how do we analyze data to get the drugs that we have in development to being used by patients as efficiently as possible? And so that encompasses the statistical analyses of the clinical trials that we're doing to support drug approvals, building health economic models to support reimbursement, and then also analysis of real-world evidence to drive adoption. So kind of all along the spectrum of a product life cycle, how do we use data to really further the adoption of the therapies?
Yeah, and it's an interesting topic, that one, and I'd love to get your take on what the future of clinical trials and the usage of real-world evidence in regulatory decision-making is going to look like, because you're on the inside, you can see what's coming, the changes that you're personally playing a hand in making. So how is this going to change with the use of data, technology, and computational sciences?
So one of the things, when I look out, say 10 years from now, how I think this will look, clinical trials are the gold standard The reason is when you have randomization, you really are able to account for any potential confounding, known or unknown. And that's really hard to get at with real world data. So I think there will always be a role for randomization. But in terms of clinical trials, now we try to answer every question using clinical trials. And when I look at the future, I see a world where we try to establish the core safety and efficacy, a couple of endpoints, really the core components, and then we're able to fill out a lot of the details by using real world evidence. So how can we kind of understand that drugs are generally safe and effective, get them into the market, and then understand how they're being used with really robust systems for monitoring and real-time learning. And so EQRx is at a really interesting point because we're building a pharmaceutical company from the ground up. And so we're able to leverage modern technologies and things that have come out. If you're at a larger established pharmaceutical company, there's a cost to ripping something out, which is the way that you've always done it, or the tools that you've always relied upon. Here, there is no, this is how we've always done it. So we kind of have a clean slate to really reimagine what this looks like and build towards the future. And so that's one of the things that I'm most excited about when I think about the future of this space and how EQRx fits in.
Yeah, it's very exciting what can potentially be accomplished in such a short space of time. Melissa, I want to get your take now on advice for aspiring and junior data scientists who are just starting their career and are potentially looking at exploring early stage startups. I speak to a lot of junior data scientists and also companies who are looking to hire as startups, and what they find is it's a balance of making people see the opportunity, taking a calculated risk versus going to the big organization where it's a little more established, a little more measured and structured, but it doesn't give you the exposure to exciting growth. So you're someone who took that risk and benefited from it massively with the amazing work at Flatiron. So looking back now, what did you learn, and what advice would you give to data scientists who are considering an early stage startup?
So what I would say is that, larger companies are great for when you're just starting out and kind of need that more structured learning program. A startup is not going to have something like that. And so early on in your career, I think that could be very valuable. But once you do have some experience and if you are in the fortunate scenario of being able to take a little bit more risk, I think joining a startup is just one of the most fun and impactful things that you can do. Being someone who has looked at a whole lot of mortality data, one of the things that I think about almost every day is just how short life is. You want to be doing things that matter every day. And so that's kind of the bar that I set when I'm thinking about what company do I want to join. You're thinking about not only the mission, is this a mission that I really, believe in, but also, are these the people that I think can really pull it off? And if we are successful, is this an idea that will have a huge impact? I think there's a lot of startups that are doing something that is noble, but maybe a little small in scope. And one of the things that I look for are kind of companies that are going to be game changers. And so that's hard to find. And I think it's worth kind of being picky because it's where you're going to be spending all of your time. But when you do find that perfect mix of team and leaders and mission and the ambition of the mission, I think it can be really powerful.
Yeah, it gives you a true north to focus on because look, work can be challenging, there can be difficult moments, it can be stressful, but if you have purpose behind it all, it makes those difficult days a lot easier to dust yourself off and come back in the next day. So yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Melissa, this has been a pleasure. It's been great to learn about not just your own amazing background from your time at Flatiron, but the exciting things that are happening at EQRx, even in the midst of COVID. The level of growth is amazing. What you're trying to do is really inspiring. And we're all looking forward to watching you accomplish it again. So thank you for coming on and talking to us about EQRx.
Stay tuned, and thanks so much for having me. This has been great.
AI in Action is brought to you by Alldus International, covering your business's staffing, consulting, and networking needs. Alldus offer an exec search program. Alldus can help you discover how data science and AI can transform your company. With our unrivaled network of C-suite executives and senior AI professionals, we offer retained search services across the US and Europe. Get the Alldus advantage. Become a member of the Alldus community and enjoy some of the following: AI meetups. Once a month, our community gathers to listen to some of the leading experts in the world of data science and AI. Our speakers come from all over the world, including Dublin, Boston, and Frankfurt. We also have our AI mentors. Our experts will provide mentoring to Alldus members. And don't forget our AI in Action podcast. Each week we have guests from all over the world talking us through their education, career, and more. Become an Alldus member and get the Alldus advantage. For more information and to sign up for our newsletter, log on to www.alldus.com. That's www.alldus.com. Alldus International, empowering through AI.